We'll record this and yeah, and then we'll go. So we're recording, and we can start with today's discussions. Today's discussion, we're talking about the hybrid warfare, and when we talk about the hybrid warfare, we of course mean the Russia state, and in order to identify how the Russian state affects our countries, we will try to touch different subjects today. Then the subject will have a distinguished guest with us. This is Denis Cenusa. Please correct me if I'm misspelling the names. He's an expert on Russian hybrid warfare in Eastern Europe and researcher of Geopolitical Security Studies Center, Lithuania. He will talk about the Russian interference on Moldova's elections. We have Dr. Elena Davlikanova, senior fellow at the Strategic and Security Center, Kiev, and the Center for European Policy Analysis, Washington, D.C. She will touch the example of Russian hybrid warfare interference on Ukraine and in Europe in particular. We have Georgi Butikashvili, an expert on Russian hybrid warfare, a member of political party Ahali, and he will discuss the Operation Russian Disinformation Network and methods of contemporary information warfare. And we have Dmitry Tskitishvili, a politician, diplomat, and former member of the Parliament of Georgia, and he will speak about the impact of the hybrid warfare on Georgia contemporary political discourse. So, floor is yours, and I would like you to introduce you a little bit. Denis, let's start with you, and then I'll give the floor to Elena, and then Georgi and Dmitry, please.
Um, Anna, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm glad to be part of this discussion. I believe that this topic is urgent because it's going on for a long time and is ongoing. So I don't think that we are gonna stop talking about this after the end of this workshop. So I believe that I hope that my contribution will somehow enrich the understanding of this phenomenon, which I would say was underestimated for some time by the EU, but also by us, those from the countries in between, which are actually the most vulnerable and the most targeted by Russia, and not only, but probably maybe somebody will touch on that, or probably will say something at the end of the workshop. So I would like to start my presentation by saying that I have been looking into this topic for some time. In my research, I have tools that allow me to monitor closely which are the narratives as well as the channels that Russia is employing to spread disinformation. And obviously, we all probably operate with disarm framework, which allows us to really understand which are the techniques, which are the tactics and approaches that Russia is using to perform its disinformation. But today, I would really like to touch on a different topic, which is closely tied to our conversation, obviously, that I call poverty weaponization. So I developed this concept based on Russia's hybrid warfare strategies that were employed against Moldova during its recent electoral cycles in 2024 and 2025. By poverty weaponization, I mean the deliberate exploitation of pre-existing social economic difficulties, as well as the novel economic crisis situations by an external actor, in our case, it's Russia, to influence political behavior and electoral outcomes when pursuing very specific geopolitical objectives. So we have to make a distinction between this concept and something that we probably know quite well, those in Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, but also Armenia. They feel that at the moment, they felt it and they feel it at the moment, which is economic coercion. Poverty weaponization is not economic coercion because poverty weaponization targets citizens directly, not governments. So the Russia is exploiting existing real economic hardship to increase the effectiveness of vote buying, financial inducements, and information manipulation. So the Moldovan case demonstrates that poverty is not only a social economic challenge, it can also be a national security vulnerability. Obviously, Russia did not create Moldova's poverty, but after its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, it systematically exploited worsening social economic conditions in Moldova to exercise political influence. So at the same time, the shortcomings in the Moldovan government's management of the economic crisis further increased these vulnerabilities. So on the one hand, we have the rising prices and the energy inflation that were prompted by the war of Russia against Ukraine, but also as a factor that contributed to this, cumulative effect of on the population is also the way the government managed the economic crisis that was originated from these geopolitical tensions between Russia, Ukraine, and Europe. So why was Moldova particularly susceptible? Russia has maintained influence in Moldova since 1990. We know that very well, and it's very common to other countries on the post-Soviet space through energy dependence, military presence in the breakaway region of the country, as you know, Transnistria, and the support for pro-Russian political actors. Now, following the invasion of Ukraine, as already mentioned, Moldova experienced a severe energy crisis. This led to nearly 30% of energy prices increase, which obviously was a very important, significant shock for the population. This decreased the purchasing power of Moldovans. And by the end of 2024, one third of the population is registered or is accounted as living in absolute poverty. This is one third of the population. You can imagine this is a very fertile soil for Russia to influence the country. So these conditions did not automatically create political instability in Moldova, but they created environment in which economically vulnerable citizens became more receptive to financial incentives offered by external actors using their local proxies, which in our case in Moldova was the fugitive oligarch Ilan Shor and his political network in Moldova. So just to make sure that we again understand what we are talking about. So Russia combined economic incentives with information operations because both aspects they were used in parallel in a coordinated hybrid campaign. So according to Moldovan authorities, Ilan Shor, the guy I mentioned before, channeled approximately 39 million US dollars through Russian financial systems to support influence operations in Moldova. These funds targeted the most vulnerable ones who were affected by poverty, by the decline in living conditions, and these are pensioners, rural communities, and other socially vulnerable groups. At the same time, what is also important to emphasize is that activists that are linked to Shore, they were paid to publish AI-generated content, spread anti-European narratives on social media, and organize paid demonstrations. Instead of relying solely on disinformation, Russia integrated. Here is something very interesting to see whether there is a commonality with other cases that we are going to discuss today. Russia integrated financial inducements with information manipulation, making both instruments significantly more effective. So central analytical point of my research that I conducted on this particular phenomenon is that poverty itself is not or was not the weapon. It's rather poverty functioned as an enabling condition for Russian hybrid warfare in general. So the economic hardship lowered the threshold for participation in influence operations. What do I mean by that? So citizens became more willing to accept financial incentives to vote for certain candidates, disseminate disinformation, or participate in organized protests. So this combination of economic vulnerability and hybrid pressure from the Russian side was also visible through something which is very interesting to take into consideration. The Russia employed also something which was for me difficult to understand at first because that didn't make simply sense to me. But they were using repeated false bomb threats against Chisinau International Airport as well as other similar activities, which I believe they were done in order to divert financial and administrative resources from the bigger necessities of the country towards security, limiting therefore the government's capacity to respond to pressing social economic challenges. In other words, Russia exhausted Moldova through all these bomb alarms and other types of psychological warfare to make the country spend more money on security than actually it would probably be doing in a normal situation and focusing more on helping socially vulnerable citizens. So I would like to finalize my first remarks by saying the following. So first, I believe that Moldova is unlikely to remain an isolated case. Russia is increasingly combining poverty exploitation with artificial intelligence, cognitive warfare, proxy organizations like Eurasian Foundation, which has been very actively involved in Moldovan electoral cycles, and long-term influence networks. The one that I mentioned already is linked to Shore, to the businessman that now is fugitive and hiding in Russia, Ilan Shore. Similar approaches I believe may emerge in other regions characterized by economic vulnerability and geopolitical competition. And I think that we saw something similar in Armenia, but I believe it can be also replicated in Western Balkans as well as Central Asia. I don't rule out Western Europe either from being a theater where Russia could use this type of hard hybrid warfare. Second, the policy implication is straightforward. Countering hybrid threats requires more than cybersecurity and strategic communication. Economic resilience, social protection, and public trust should also be considered essential components of national security. And lastly, protecting democracy increasingly requires protecting vulnerable citizens from becoming instruments of foreign influence. Therefore, recognizing poverty weaponization as a distinct mechanism of hybrid warfare can help governments develop more comprehensive strategies for democratic resilience. And here I will stop.
Thank you, Denis. I'd like to ask you, what were the mechanisms actually that the Moldovan government used to sustain this pressure and to oppose it? Because
The
we know that there were really tough processes going during the elections, and apparently, as you correctly mentioned, there were like in influences on the part. They apparently used the oligarch power in order to fulfill the results of but to fulfill their expectations. But what were the mechanisms and how you actually sustained it?
the Moldovan government used the support of the European Union to give to subsidize the prices on gas and electricity. This was a measure which was, I believe, was considered as urgent necessity because Moldovan government cannot simply sustain such costs by itself. But additionally, what was also important to develop and implement is a strategic communication mechanism which at some point has been also used to protect the image of the government in general on the in the political competition at home. So there are both positives and negatives when it comes to how the government used this, including the EU support, to kind of like isolate the population from the effects of the war in Ukraine, the geopolitical tensions, and Russian energy pressures. But I think that at some point this became more of how the government can actually use this external threat to promote its own political interests. And I think that here is exactly where I see a big problem. But probably I will return to this issue in after the following
Yeah.
presentations.
Thank you, Denis. Before you, absolutely right when you mentioned that it's not only the particular problem of Moldova, Ukraine, or Georgia, it's wider problem. And unfortunately, that was the problem that a lot of countries, including Western, the civilized world, did not look at this subject as a serious subject. And the results that we're gaining at the moment is the result of this unserious approach, unfortunately. But I'd like to ask also before we move to Elena, and she will tell us a little bit about the influence on the Ukrainian image and the Europe as well. I'd like to ask Dmitry or Georgi if they can find some similarities from what was Denis talking about, like how did the same situation can be observed whether in Georgia or not.
Um, I would say that in Georgia we have a bit different situation because we have already a Russian regime, Russian government, not directly linked, not directly. They are not saying that they are Russians, but we have in the government the guys who are completely linked to Russia and the Russian oligarchs. So the situation is different. In Moldova or in Armenia, there are pro-Western governments, and they have this power to control the situation. In Georgia, the only control is Georgian Dream, Ivanishvili's government. So they don't need any external actors from Russia to conduct here disinformation campaign. They are doing themselves now, and they did before as well, before war started in Ukraine. And I will talk about that in my presentation as well. But now, currently, the Georgia is completely out of the box, out of the association agreement countries, out of the candidate status countries, where has been preserved pro-Western governments, and the governments got huge support from Europe, because Georgia had the support. The support for Georgia, it was too late, because 12 years of Ivanishvili's regime managed to build up here the autocracy with state capture procedures. So this is the main difference now, what we have in Georgia. And what is in Moldova or in Ukraine is still in conventional war. Is completely different story as well. So Armenia and Moldova is more similar situation, and they have to fight in hybrid warfare, in informational warfare differently. Ukraine is fighting in conventional war, and we are almost finalizing of autocratic system here. So is Russian regime. So the laboratory what Russia started here, first time in Georgia, it is succeeded. It's somehow on the way to succeed.
Thank you. Dmitry, do you think that these poverty mechanisms are something similar to what we can find out in here? Maybe, yeah, as Georgi mentioned correctly, we have a regime that is basically um, the right hand of the Kremlin, and Russia doesn't really need maybe their influence on Georgia in that sense. But whether the mechanisms are somehow similar on what we can comment on this.
So yeah, definitely the poverty weaponization is one of the instruments, and I would say that not only the poverty, but all the vulnerabilities of the society, political, structural, economic, are used by the autocracies, no, by the propaganda, and but from a different angle. Of course, in Moldova, they are criticizing the government and blaming the government for this poverty, while the Georgia government is using the Russia's interference in Ukraine, in the invasion in Ukraine, as resources of the enriching the Georgia's economy, and showing and portraying the Georgia as a success story, and saying that now we are reducing the poverty, reducing the absolute poverty, and we're just ahead of the many European countries. That's a kind of different angle of the discourses, but still this is a kind of weaponization and the fake narratives about the success story of Georgia's economy based on the current political system, which is a quite openly anti-European and blaming Europe for the problems we have. So that's something like we definitely observe here as well.
Thank you, Dmitry. Elena, I'd like to give you a floor. Tell us a little bit about the subject and the effect on this. Like we already mentioned that it's not only Ukraine, it's not only Georgia and Moldova. However, the situation in Ukraine is completely different. It's an open war, it's a conventional war that is happened. We actually really hope that this war will soon end, but what are the mechanisms that the Russian hybrid war uses in order to change the image of the Ukraine outside? What are the mechanisms they're trying to, how they're trying to affect the Europe and the States, maybe?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Anna, for the invitation. It's an honor. My name is Elena Davlikanova. I'm a senior fellow with Center for European Policy Analysis, a think tank in DC, and also Sagledachny Security Center, a think tank based in Kiev. And the work that I will be talking today about is connected to the work of Sagledachny Security Center. At the beginning of last year, we published a comprehensive report called Russia 2032, a decade past full-scale invasion, from a neighbor who knows too well, which depicts what kind of Russia we may face in 10 years, counting from the full-scale invasion, if we apply one of the three major policies that has been applied by the West to Russia for this last many decades. So it is either a reset of relationship, it is cautious cooperation, or it is rivalry. And to us, it's very joyful that finally, after a year and a half of games and attempts from the American administration to push the reset button once again, the spirit of encourage is not there anymore. So we even received a promise to allow Ukraine to produce Patriot missiles on this NATO summit. So overall, we see how important it is to explain what we will face if we keep repeating mistakes of the past, if we keep not learning from that. But also in parallel, we need to be very vigilant in understanding what exactly Russia is doing right now. And that is why a very important part of what we are doing is, first of all, we study the war of the new generation, and we are trying to explain our European partners what exactly has to be done right now in order to not face Russia empty-handed in a short to mid-term period. But also we are trying to explain that this war is not Ukraine's war, it's not Ukraine's problem, how some Europeans are still thinking. It is our joint continental, very big problem. And Russia is very serious about what it is doing. It has started this war not because it wanted to occupy a couple of villages in Donetsk or the whole Donetsk Oblast, or it didn't start the war because of Crimea, or even the whole Ukraine. Like their strategic goals are way wider, way bigger, and I will talk about what they are expecting a little bit further. So the overall umbrella topic for us is sub-threshold warfare of Russia that it is currently conducting against Europeans. Because if we lose European support, for Ukraine, it will be much harder to defeat Russia. For Europeans, it will be their own death sentence because they will not prepare themselves to the opposition that will continue so this fight will continue for another decade. So with this sub-threshold warfare, we see two sides. One is kinetic and another is cognitive, or as Russians say, mental warfare. So when it comes to cognitive warfare, at the beginning of this year, we launched a sub-threshold warfare tracker. It is an online instrument for journalists and researchers, which shows a map with open source incidents of Russian attacks or against European states across a number of categories. We have airspace, incursions, land, incursion, maritime, sabotage, also military threats, major cyber attacks, But of course, we do understand that things like, for example, spoofing or jamming, they are accounted in tens of thousands. Some of the northern states, Nordic states, they stopped even registering each and every case of such thing because otherwise they will have no time to actually work. So if we look at what Russia is doing, these kinetic attacks, they are covering not only the bordering states. So when we think about the kinetic part, we first think about Romania, Poland, Baltic states, maybe Finland. But in reality, these attacks happened all over, all across Europe, even in Canada and the United States. Moreover, what we are trying to say that if Ukraine managed to prepare and implement operation like a spider web in the midst of Russia, this is a new type of affair which can be at any time organized by Russians anywhere in Europe, because it's very easy to enter any European state with not even Russian passport, but a passport of Cyprus or whatever. Then you have a printer, then you print some details for a small drone. The only thing is you have to get an explosives, and then you can organize any type of terrorist attack anywhere. So we need to think about these things, because in many cases, even local law enforcement authorities don't have protocols of reaction if they have this type of unmanned systems on ground systems or aerial systems, so they don't know what to do with that and how to proceed. Moreover, one part of this kinetic subthreshold warfare is the work of the shadow fleet. We here in Ukraine say that there is no such thing as a shadow fleet, because we can track each and every vessel anywhere from from any port and follow them down the routes. So there is a whole website where you can do that. The question to again our European allies, why we are not that serious when it comes to stopping this this money flooding then the war against not only Ukraine but also Europeans. And it's very good that now Ukraine is implementing kinetic sanctions against these ships as well, as recently happened. And I think you have read the news. So when it comes again to the kinetic part of the subthreshold warfare, everyone is affected, and unfortunately there is probably not enough political will among many Europeans to be very serious in responding in kind. We remember these two major blows when it comes to drone incursion in Poland and in Romania. And both times, this was, honestly, it caused me panic attacks, because Ukrainians bought for years for Europeans, and these border countries have not built a system of response to a very small number of drones. In Poland, it was 20, from 19 to 23, depends on the source, and only a small bunch was put down. The others, they were lucky that most of them were decoy drones. But imagine if any of these countries would experience one night as Ukrainians are experiencing. And since the beginning of this year, there have been already 3 major attacks, combined attacks with a number of missiles, ballistic missiles, and hundreds of drones. So Europeans not only have to expand or speed up with the drone wall, but they need to include Ukraine, because these front countries, they don't have strategic depth, and without Ukraine it will be very difficult for them, especially when it comes not only equipment itself, but the skills that Ukrainians have acquired during this war. So the second part, the cognitive warfare. So why there is a major difference between how Europeans and Russians are seeing what exactly is going on? Well, if you have read the report of NATO on cognitive warfare, they are trying to influence the cognition after, like, they have this concept of ODA, observe, orient, decide, and act. And so they are trying to work with people on the when they already have to process information and then at that stage lead them to the necessary decisions. While Russians, they do not call it cognitive warfare, they call it mental warfare, and they are saying we are not working with cognition as such. We are not trying to influence, how people think. We are trying to influence who people become. So what they are trying to do, they are trying to shape you before you even have to get to the point where you are making this decision. And unfortunately, this is very hard to detect, and because there is such a huge tradition of tolerance and dialogue in Europe, they are so slow in actually coming up with very specific and bold steps in cutting down Russian influence. And the channels of this Russian influence is not only media, because this Sputnik or RT, they are not popular anymore. Russians are very good in using social media, but more so, they have Orthodox churches that are opened across European states. Most of these churches are connected to Russian intelligence. They have bloggers that the local bloggers who are knowingly or unknowingly spreading Russian narratives, and we need to be very vigilant, because these mind viruses that are spread by Russia, they are very harmful. Ukraine knows it very well, because when it comes to narratives that prevented our allies to be efficient and to not create their own red lines when it comes to the aid to Ukraine, everything has been prepared decades before. So one of these major narratives that defined the development of events on the ground, where, for example, that Russia is invincible. And this narrative, we debunk it because it lost a number of wars. Moscow was burned at least twice, and the third time recently because Ukraine is developing its long-range capabilities. And by the way, Russians blow their own facilities with very poor air defense skilled personnel. So another one is that Ukraine is incapable, that Ukraine is not a state, it's a failed state, and so on and so forth. Ukraine proved that it is not, that we have very highly skilled people, very motivated, and the amount of effort that people like myself had to invest into changing the mindset of very many people in the West since the full-scale invasion, it is literally enormous. Because Russia, during all these decades, were creating or holding all these festivals, cultural events, sports events, diplomatic events. They were bringing in and out all these decision makers to Russia. Oh, look, we have the big theater, and so on and so forth. So even this discussion about Russian culture today, because Ukrainians believe that while this genocidal war, where every day at least 8 Ukrainians, and I mean civilian Ukrainians, are killed, I don't think that it is the right time to discuss where Tolstoy or Dostoevsky have anything to do with what is going on right now. Because if you are living in peace because of Ukrainians, if Ukraine had fallen at the beginning of the 2022, I don't know how many European states would still enjoy their freedoms and democratic rights and so on. So if you are living in peace and you're protecting your right for pleasure to read or listen to those composers or writers that are currently are being explicitly used by Russian propaganda to create the positive image of the country that had killed so many people. And during even this 1 month since the beginning of July, 60 people in Kiev didn't wake up in their homes because they were killed during the night in their beds. So I think that we can kind of listen to other musicians and read other books. I think that humanity has created enough for us to understand that today promoting anything related to Russia is dangerous, because it creates this kind of connection that Russia is also, it brings some pleasure into our lives. But honestly speaking, if Russia ever gets to control political parties in the European Union, control civil society organizations, this life that Europeans believe goes by default will be completely changed. And one of such examples of mental warfare which was successful was the organized rallies by German students who said that it is better to live under Putin than to protect your own land. I think this is one major example of how exactly you can shape who you are before decisions even have to be made. And to wrap up, I want to just say that there is a very good recent report by Christa Groziev with the Insider. And from those materials that they have published, there is one leak that says that shows the communication between the officers. And Russian officers say that morality and ethics should play no part in everything that is going to happen when it comes to cognitive or mental warfare against the West. So if they are not going to be limited by morality or ethics, we should, we should understand what our strategies should be in order to be effective in countering these people. So I'll stop there and maybe we'll talk.
Thank you, Elena. Indeed, you touched the very important subjects. First, that the understanding of the protection in European Union is slowed down because the cognitive and the mental warfare, it's basically quite an interesting difference that you actually mentioned. And particularly in Georgia, we observed it for the last decade, and it's pretty obvious at the moment, and it's really visible for us. I'd like you to, and unfortunately, the European Union as well, and not only the other countries as well of the West, unfortunately, don't see the other platforms that Russia uses in terms of cognitive and in terms of mental warfare, such a cultural platform. They only see them as a kind of unserious business that it's a censorship. If they will reject it, it's a censorship. If they will, it's not a part of the democracy if we won't give them a platform. But on the other hand, as you correctly mentioned, it's actually a political platform. It's actually a platform that uses the tools of the hybrid war and the disinformation and creates exactly this mental warfare. Is this something that we are all facing? And I'd like to ask also Denis and Georgi and Dmitry to refer to the subject. Denis, maybe you can also give us some similarities and examples how it worked in Moldova. Can you distinguish this mental warfare mechanisms, or maybe give us some examples how did it affect it?
Yeah, when I was listening to Elena, I for some reason I was thinking what the Russians are doing by using their airstrikes on Kiev and the impact, the psychological impact of that. And I can recall at least two incidents when the reaction of the head of the EU delegation, Katerina Maternova, which were authentic, which were sincere, which were out of her own experience, were exploited by Russians to show that the Europeans are afraid of what is happening to Ukraine, so therefore they will not provide more support to Ukraine, or that they are gonna call their diplomats to go back home, leaving Ukraine isolated. So this is also part of this cognitive warfare that they are conducting, and I think that it's important to understand that the kinetics and this cognitive aspect, they are very, very much interlinked. So therefore, I gave you this example to show again that what is being done on the battlefront, it's also kind of like linked immediately to what they try to convey through their channels into the media space, and creating this very altered, obviously, images of the EU in Ukraine as well as of the Ukrainians as being a threat to the EU. You know, it's not just about what the Ukrainians are doing at home, but how this threat can be exported to the rest of Europe. This is also a narrative that they are using quite a lot, I would say.
I completely agree with what Denis has said, and this kinetic and cognitive warfare, they are so interconnected because when you see how our successes on the battlefield impacted the mindset of our allies and how way more bolder they have become when it came to support for Ukraine, new projects, and also somewhat narratives. I think that this is, these two sides, they truly go hand in hand. And moreover, also these horrific videos and pictures from Kiev, this is a message to Europeans, like, look what can happen to you as well if you kind of continue doing that, because the nuclear narrative and nuclear blackmail doesn't have as much impact anymore as it used to have at the very beginning of the full-scale invasion.
Thank you. Georgi, can you give us?
Yeah, it was great, Elena. Really, the all the sorts, modern military sorts of Russia deployed in everywhere, and really everywhere in the half of the world, we see the same pattern. And when you mentioned the church and the role of church, how they are using their KGB methods and priests in Europe, the same situation we have here, and more. Funny story is that we have here astrologists and fortune tellers who are also in this business, really in this business, spreading completely disinformation. And we saw it also before the war, when the pandemic started, how they spread the narratives against European Union and generally the Western countries about the Pfizer. So the network is there. The Russian network, if they are a huge network, what they have in Georgia, huge troll farms, what they have here. But the thing is, they are not Russians, they are Georgians here working there. And Georgian Dream, the government is protecting them and the making them exist and helping them and using the same networks what Russians had before in Georgia before the war started. The Georgian the last decade story is different, but when you zoom out, it's the same. But it had different storytelling when they started. Then it changed. Then different actors came, but the full narrative stays same with these actors. With these networks? What you're saying, they are using all the networks here as well against the people.
Dmitry.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Elena, for interesting presentation. Definitely, there is one strategy. It's a Russian playbook, as we call it, but it's a tailored approach for every country and every period of time. Because what was mentioning Elena, it reminded me 2028, Russia's invasion in Georgia, which was much limited in scale and in time, but still very much similar to how this double approach of war and this hybrid war approach was used. And of course, there was much less instruments at that time, much less developed social media tools and networks and system, but definitely it was quite similar. So it is much more advanced now, if we could say like this. But at the same time, we could see the similarities, maybe the main trends, main lines, but also similarities are according to who is in government, who is in charge in the particular country. So therefore, we are a bit different. Our tailored approach in Georgia is slightly different from Ukraine and Moldova, while Georgia case is quite similar to Serbia and recently with Hungary. So again, because of the narrative should be focused on the internal political system as well, and who is in charge, who is in who against whom this propaganda is directed. So in Georgia case, so yes, and definitely what I think it's very, very important to mention, Ukraine war is instrumentalized in Georgia case against the European Union, and it's very obvious. So they not always the officials are directly saying that, but depending on who is talking, these statements are quite hard, direct, or soft, or ambiguous. But still, there is a message that European Union should be blamed for Russia's invasion in Ukraine. or provoking the war. And in Georgia case, it's interpreted as a kind of launching the second front line, which was Georgia was pushed by the conspiracy groups like a deep state or global war party who is behind all these Western democracies. So that is something also very much instrumentalized and weaponized in Georgia case.
Georgi, if you can give us a little bit an overview on the Georgian case so we could understand, and then we'll go back to the.
Okay. I will be briefly. I try to be briefly because it's huge 10 years or 14 years what we have in Georgia with Georgian Dream is Ivanishvili's government. But everything started, as Dmitry mentioned, in 2008 when Russia started war against Georgia. And it was somehow example for Russian military groups and military generals that they should transfer something in their military doctrine. Because in 5 days the war has been finished. The support of Georgia from European countries and from US at the time, it was huge. So the Russia realized that they should change something in their military doctrine. So we see in 2009 completely new military doctrine in Russia, which is more concentrated on hybrid warfare tactics, and even is written there that they should stop conventional war and using more tactical manners in post-Soviet countries. And we saw the first laboratory of Ivanishvili's project 2012 when he has been elected as a new government in Georgia. And whole 2 years from 2009 until 2012, it was huge special operation. It was really special operation of Russia with Ivanishvili's personality, Russian oligarch, and there are many evidences how Ivanishvili used polytechnology of Russians, helping them to set up completely new story about Saakashvili's UNM's previous government, who was dragging Georgia in the war in 2008. So they built up all their campaign against UNM nation, on Saakashvili's party, to create a huge enemy of Georgianhood who started war. And Saakashvili was guy who started the war. Even Georgian Dream at that time repeated the same messages what Russia was talking with our Western partners. So then was the testing the process in 2014 in Ukraine with Crimea and Donbass, how they managed to convince Western countries, European countries, that it was somehow internal political issue in Ukraine and it was a national conflict between two societies or pro-Russians. So at that point, almost in Europe and the US as well, they could not understand what is happening in Ukraine. So that's why we had some negotiations, Minsk negotiation, etc., completely undercover. So Putin tried to be undercover on the situation, and while what was happening in Crimea at the time 2014, and Putin managed to cover everything that Europe is watching blindly what is happening on the route or on the geopolitical field. So Ivanishvili here in Georgia started state capturing process. It was we should Ivanishvili's process divide in two parts. One part until 2022, before the war started in Ukraine, and after the war. So it is completely different Georgian Dream and completely different Ivanishvili's regime, because until 2022, Ivanishvili started state capturing process with court reform, media controlling. It was like, I'm always saying, the boiling frog process. He tried to put frog in cold water and turned on the heat. So no one understand the Georgian society and Georgian state was boiling, and until it came to the end of boiling, their civil society and all the parties on all the active society became weak to fight against, and that's why these hybrid tactics were eventually used against their people. Is somehow successfully, the laboratory in Georgia is somehow successfully what we see now in Georgia, in what kind of situation Georgian society and general Georgian statehood is. So before 2022, Ivanishvili's government was pro-Western. They know, they are saying in TVs everywhere they want to join the EU. Even we had this association agreement, then we had visa-free regime signed in 2017. It was nicely, but at the same time, it was allowed from 2012 until 2022. Well, we had more than 60 Russian organization registered in Georgia, Russian-Georgian relationship, Russian-Georgian Institute. There are many Russian dialogue process executed, and that, of course, everyone know in Georgian Dream what they are doing, how they are talking with Russian agents in Georgia, and then Russian agents were in Georgia talking with normal people conducting projects. They created the media who was directly financed by Russians, some conservative conservative ideas. Even Dugin was in live talk shows in this media, who said Georgia should be not pro-Western, pro-Russia, it should be pro-Georgian. So this narrative was created parallel to Georgian Dream, who was claiming that they are very pro-Western government, until 2022, when it was a red line supporting Ukraine or not supporting Ukraine, and even society here protest started because Ivanishvili's government doesn't want it to support Ukraine publicly. It was obvious that something has been to be changed. So they invented deep state. They invented at the time all the drugging in second front story to threaten Georgian people, to somehow this supporting attitude toward Ukraine somehow to break, but it worked completely opposite. And then was the election, the final election, democratic election 2024. So in parallel, what changed? But what changed until 2022, until that period, it was impossible, not imaginary that even Ukraine, Moldova, or Georgia could be integrated in European Union. And that's, of course, that it was publicly for everyone. So what Ivanishvili did in public narrative, so they are pro-Western, but even they knew that it will never happen. Parallel state capture process, parallel strengthening these networks of Russian allies. And then in 2024, rigged election, falsified. It was completely falsified. The elections, 12% is different between what they wrote on the paper and what was the exit polls. And there was Malkevich at this time. Malkevich is the guy who is controlling now troll farms in St. Petersburg. He is successor of Prigozhin, and he was before in election period in Georgia, and he was assigned as a media and got certification of Central Election Commission as an observer, as a media observer. Malkevich, who is the guy of troll farms. And you think in Georgian Dream, in special security services, they don't know about it? Of course, because the guy is also in connection with all the troll farms Georgian Dream here is managing. Georgian Dream got grants from UK embassy as well in 2017 and in 2018 to build up Stratcom, strategic communication for promoting European ideas. and the same Stratcom started a huge campaign, anti-Western campaign against Europe. So the thing is, they used European money, they built up this network and used them against European Union and against UK and against all the it is supported also, of course, by Church, and the Church is huge actor in this story because the Georgians are Georgianhood means somehow to be Orthodox, to be religious. So the identity is very incorporated in religious, very incorporated in our identity. So the religion, the Church, and bishops who are also linked to Russian KGB, Church, Kremlin. They are also using their preaches, and in my research, there are many of preaches who were anti-Western and anti-opposition as well, because we opposition or we the civil society, all of us who are criticizing Georgian Dream, we are radicals, we are agents. That's why they adopted new law against civil society, because only thing was left who was strong in Georgia. All of the other institution has been captured. It was the civil society in the grants, which was coming from the European Union or the other countries. So the only this vibrant civil society has been shut down because we are radicals. Their narrative, meta narrative, they are preserving the peace in Georgia. They are preserving here some Georgian identity, and others, us, we are radicals. We want war in Georgia. Even in campaign, election campaign, they used billboards. Half Ukraine, how looks Ukraine bombed and ruins, and what is Georgian dream giving to Georgian people, peace and happy life. But in reality, in this is meta narrative, what they are trying to convince people, and the trauma from 2008, trauma from 90s, everything is about trauma, about war, and discrediting civil society, discrediting opposition parties, arresting opposition parties in a couple of days, weeks. All of the political party leaders will be jailed for sabotage case, for working foreign countries, so for 5, 6, 7 years. So this is finalization process of autocracy. But the meta narrative is they want peace, they want prosperity, and they want better future. Europe is LGBT. Europe is dying. Europe is I don't know, losing identity, and there's no real Europe anymore. So why should we be part of Europe? So if the Europe is fake. So this is this big narrative what they are spreading, man. In reality, they are preserving their power through police and through clans and gangsters they created last 14 years. The Russian style gangster. I'm always saying we know this Breaking Bad TV show, there is this gangster story. So the same structure, same governing process has been built in Georgia last 14 years. So on the paper, maybe there is a ministry, there is some parliament, there are some institutions, some court, but in reality, it is only facade. So one guy is governing everything, and there are clans, same gangsters who he is in collaboration with Russian
Use this
gangsters.
as tools for.
As the tools, yes. So troll farms, huge farms, even in somehow it's popular now, I think, to become a troll because I'm seeing that this huge campaign against opposition parties, even I post something stupid, there are thousands of trolls commenting behind below my post.
It could be addressed also the poverty and the alternative source of income for the society. However,
yeah, of course, the poverty, what Denis said, poverty is here instrumentalized for Georgian dream to stay in the power and to have these links and sanctions. Sanction evasion, and or if what Georgian dream Ivanishvili is doing for Russia is sanction evasion. We are seeing here money laundering of Russian rubles. Millions of rubles has been washed, and there's an investigation, different investigation, journalistic investigations, some other investigations who are which are online, so everyone can see how they are helping Russians, and Russians are here making businesses, opening the businesses, living here, and becoming somehow also Georgians with passports. So in the long-term perspective, it's a huge problem for security, for Georgian statehood. But we are not talking about that because the topics are urgent on the streets, because the people are arresting, the people are jailed, people are beaten up in the streets by these gangster groups. So the state capture process is going parallel. That the focus is on different topics, while the Russians are here spreading their metastasis of cancer. So that's why I'm saying that Georgian case is good exemplar, good laboratory how hybrid warfare, informational warfare, psychological warfare can be succeeded if in government are the Russian proxies.
Thank you, Georgi. Dimitri, I would like you to add on the subject on Georgia, and then for the final remarks, because we're a little bit running out of time already, I would like again Denis and Elena to
Actually,
come up with the remarks. I'll ask you, because yeah, we know that the situation is tough, but we still are looking for something positive, and if we will join our sources, maybe we can sustain this
it's
hybrid
about, of course,
warfare.
it's about.
And this is also something positive. So I'd like Dimitri you to add to the Georgian case, and then Denise and Elena, please.
Oh, thank you, Anna. So actually, the privilege of being last is probably keeps much less to say, but my focus is like not so much about the propaganda itself, but about the structural system and how this propaganda evolves from the marginal to the mainstream. I think it's important because many components of the propaganda, which is also used in Georgia, was described by the previous speakers, and I think it's okay. The main strategic line is the same, even though every propaganda and hybrid war methods are tailored for the country. So, but in Georgia case, I think it's very important to observe how this evolved from the marginal discourses, from the mainstream discourses, and I'm directly connected it to the regime transformation. Actually, okay, Georgia never been a full democracy, but at least when the Georgia was democratized in a democratization process, whatever the background of the Ivanishvili was, but still the political discourses were limiting the ability of the government to follow this propaganda or were pushing the system to the government to counter the propaganda coming from the Russia, definitely not from the other countries, but only from Russia. So I will divide the periods before 2018, 2020, and after. Because actually, I think that Georgian Dream started changing the attitude when definitely they understood that democracy and the westernization, the European integration, is not anymore the way to keep the power, but it's a threat for their power. So therefore, they started using the different instruments that they changed not only the internal geopolitical and internal political system, but also changed the role and changed the way how they used these disinformation tools inside of the country. So first stage, as I said, is a kind of before 2020. Let's say this could be like a longer process, like it was transformation process started, in my understanding, a bit earlier, like in 2018, I think, but 2020 could be the dividing point. So first, I would say that I still was in the parliament, and I remember that the disinformation as external threat was included in many state documents, and it was included permanently every year in the report of the State Security Service as a permanent external and one of the main external threat of the Georgia state security. It was reflected to the many documents, and that was kind of state policy, and many fundings were used in order to structureize the anti-propaganda strategic communication units in different state agencies and so on. So the state was quite strongly playing the role, at least pretending to fight against the propaganda, and then definitely the propaganda have never had a strong roots and strong influence in Georgian society. Even so, it was very massively, intensively used against the Georgian, in Georgia by the Russia. So I would underline several reasons for that. First of all, the main carriers of the Russian narratives were conservative groups, but not always very mainstream and very strongly popular. Even the Georgian church, which is one of the strongest conservative institutions, was quite modest against criticizing European Union. Mostly the very active promoters of the anti-Western, anti-democratic propaganda were marginal political organizations, marginal political media platforms, not political, but media platforms. And they were like the entire the propaganda was quite marginalized, even though the Georgian government was kind of flirting with this propaganda, trying to somehow keep these conservative voices inside of their political organization, but still mainly keeping this Westernization politics as a main instrument of their political main political process. So another reason is external anchoring. I would say the Euro-Atlantic integration was worked as an external anchor for determining internal political processes as well. So it was very much interconnected, internal democratic transformation with external Euro-Atlantic integration. Again, another very big issue, the broad public and political consensus on that. Every political party who was openly pro-Russian or supported the same narratives or support the same narratives were very much marginalized in the political spectrum. And we saw that even quite popular once the political leader of one of the political parties, Nino Burjanadze, when she started promoting the very openly pro-Russian politics, so she was marginalized and she was pushed out, by naturally was pushed out from the political process. And I'm not talking about the other smaller political parties who never reached significant level. So the very important observation from my side and for the ruling party pro-European discourses was itself a way of holding the power. That is important. So, but turning point was when the Western orientation and democracy became a threat for the power. So it started from the, I would say, from the presidential elections, where the Georgian dream was first time challenged by the opposition, and since that time they starting establishing much stricter control on some independent democratic institutions, which was even developed during the time of the first period of time of the Georgian Dream. So they started capturing the state institutions and establishing much stricter control. I would say that this is a turning point. Of course, this became much more obvious and much more clear in 2020, 2021, and definitely in 2022, after the Russian invasion in Ukraine, it became much more obvious that Georgia was keeping this side, and then they started using the propaganda as again main instrument of keeping the power. This was important because from the Western partners were coming democratic requirements to democratize the Georgian society, Georgian political system, which was probably considered the main threat for the Georgian authorities, while Russian propaganda was not requiring, or Russia was not requiring anything. So therefore, the propaganda became quite important and useful tools to fight, to keep the power. So here's the main shift time. So what used to be the hybrid tool that Russia used against the Georgia has partly turned into a tool that the Georgian government used to protect its own power. So, and here the main meta narrative, Georgi mentioned, but main narrative was war and peace. Which started from 2022, and it was like a foundational narrative in order to build up all the fake narratives on this foundation. So and used by the propaganda, this traumas, collective traumas and memories of the Georgian society, war threat, which is obvious here and never left the Georgia because the Georgia's territories are occupied. But after this Russian invasion of Ukraine, this threat became even more more immediate. I mean, more clear for the people, and it was very much instrumentalized by the Georgian regime as a main threat. And then they started promoting the idea. Then they like normalization relations with Russia, not very fully pro-Russian, but normalization with Russia is kind of a way to protect the Georgian security. And then the European Union is they're pushing us to launch the second front line in support of the Ukraine war, and then so on and so on. So that narrative was very much instrumentalized, and I would say that they built the quite strong foundation for the next layers of the narratives. But what is specific on Georgia case? I mean, these narratives are quite similar in many countries, Moldova, or probably in other countries, in the Serbia or Hungary. But what was the specific in Georgia case? That strategic ambiguity about this European integration. So that is very paradoxical, but still Georgia government is mentioning European integration as a strategic foreign policy priority. And they are talking about that permanently. And there is several reasons, and mainly two reasons for that. Domestic politics, for sure. Because of the large part of even Georgian dream supporters, and big part of the Georgian population are very strongly supporting the Georgia's European integration and democratization of the Georgia. So that is very important. And openly fully anti-Western, anti-democratic rhetoric, not anti-democratic, but fully anti-European rhetoric could be very risky in this stage. But it's not something will not be reached in the nearest futures. I mean, the propaganda is evolving and changing, and it became more and more hard. But still, I think at this current stage, they are still continuing this narrative. The second reason is, I think, which is more practical, I would say, to attract the external financial flows. The Georgia must not be fully cut off from the Western market. It must not be the fully gray zone. It does not not to lose the attractiveness for the financial resources, including the sanctioned Russian capital. And I remind you the case of Ulevi, where the case was used for Russian sanctioned companies conference, and that was only possible because Georgia still had some kind of connection with Western companies, even though this oil was sold to the European market, which never reached the European market, but still it was enough to somehow help the Russian company or Russian company to somehow use the shadow fleet oil to create the new certificate of the origin. This membership is not something they definitely need, but they need to keep these discourses. And paradoxically, they are talking, the GD leaders are talking about the Georgia's European future and the European integration much more often in a different economic forums, like in Gulf countries, especially in Abu Dhabi or in Dubai, than in actual European summits, like in Yerevan during the European political community
they
summit.
They are not invited anymore. So
sorry, no,
they are not invited.
Sorry. So
in
actually,
European
they are
summit.
invited. They participate not in European Union summit level, but in European political community levels, like several times this year, last year. But they are not mentioning European integration anymore with European leaders. Rather than mostly they're talking about that with economic forums, where the concentration of legal and illegal money is quite large, and they of course will invest in Georgia just only in case the Georgia is not a fully gray zone, because actually if this Georgia is a gray zone, there is no the need for them to use the Georgia as a money lending process or so on. So that's the situation. So actually, here we are, and again, I'm connecting this transformation with the regime's more changes. If they, as soon as they became they understood that the European integration is threat for them, they started using the propaganda. The propaganda became quite intensive, and I would say effective, because many people, despite the number of the pro-European part of the Georgian society, which is still high, I would say that they quite significantly damaged the reputation in Europe, and they increased the number of skepticals. Not maybe significantly, but there are some changes in numbers, and that is true. And sometimes, unfortunately, they're using not only the Russian propaganda, but the members of these anti-European networks inside of Europe. They are quite oftenly citing the Western intellectuals, you can call it like this, or some Western European politicians, especially from the very right-wing, radical wings from Germany or from other parts.
IASD. They are
definitely. So therefore, that propaganda is getting much more effective when the regime internally is changing, and there is my kind of recipe. So what should we do, and how it was possible? Actually, this is one maybe a final point. So this was possible because actually during the regime transformation from democratizing regime to the fully autocratic, there was a kind of weakness or lack of resilience from the democratic institutions. None of these state democratic institution was strong and independent enough to resist to the state capture attempts from the Georgian regime. Civil society, which was one of the best and strongest democratic institution in Georgia, was so much dependent on the international donors' fundings that cutting this donor funding was kind of almost eliminate the civil society from Georgian space. And again, then Georgian civil society was not so much based on the grassroots level, grassroots movements and community organizations. And therefore it was much easier to eliminate this organization than to eliminate that segment as a kind of protest society. Political parties, again, they seem to be the very election-oriented political clubs rather than the movement-based organization. Therefore, they could not organize this existing public negative sentiments and protests in a political process in order to counter or to terminate this internal political system transformation and to counter the propaganda. And unfortunately, the political parties were weak to counter the agenda setting process. So that unfortunately they still so now the Georgian dream is not only leading the process, but they are setting the political agenda. And political opposition and opposition societies mostly are commenting and are in a reactive mode. While the significant important is that to counter the propaganda, is important that the political parties, alternative political parties, not maybe having so much resources, but still should manage to somehow set the political agenda and to make the propaganda in reactive mode rather than proactive mode. And in reactive mode, and we saw this example, correct me, Georgi, if I'm wrong, but when BBC case of investigation about this some chemical components that was used by the police during the protest dismissal, the scandal came out, then the Georgian dream and propaganda was quite confused for some times. But there was a kind of very rare cases, such a kind of proactive agenda settings where the propaganda is confused. And because the strong propaganda also has a weakness, they are quite solid and organized, but they are not so flexible to reorganize and in case there is a kind of some messages coming from the outside of the propaganda. So I think, therefore, that's important to really counter, especially in countries where the dominant regime is on the side of propaganda. It's very important to to go back to the society and to get the support from the society to direct communicate with the people and to manage to somehow change the political agenda. While in case of where the opposition is on propaganda side, so I think that's important that to focus more on the real reform, on the democratic institutional reform, not to make it facade reforms like it was in Georgia, but to fundamentally change, to make this institution much stronger, to make the civil society not fully dependent on the international donor sources, but also to establish the strong instruments of operationalization of the civil society in order to make the resilience, democratic resilience, as a main instrument against the propaganda. So I will finish here and ready to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dmitry. So, Denis, I'd like to ask you shortly to conclude on the discussion that we talked today. There were several subjects that we touched, and what are the subjects you might identify that are like a common and that we could somehow sustain and combine the resources that we have, and what are the strategies that would recommend? It's basically the recommendation what you would expect. And the same I would like Elena, and then Georgi and Dmitry, if you'd like to add a few words, but please this time shortly. Thank you. Denis, please.
Thank you, Anna. I was listening very carefully all the presentations. I believe that what we can have as takeaways from our chat today is that Russia is omnipresent. It's not wasting time and resources. It's creating a machinery that most likely will be used also during the peacetime, whatever that peace will look like. We speak about billions that have been, I think now we really can speak about billions that have been fueled into this propaganda machinery as well as hybrid warfare. So this money, this infrastructure is not going to just, disappear suddenly. It's going to be repurposed for the future. This is the first takeaway. And then the second takeaway, and here I fully agree with what Georgi and Dmitry mentioned. I think that Elena was trying also to emphasize that, is that each case is individual. Russia is very skillfully, changing its lenses and its instruments to be as efficient as possible with what it has on the ground. It can be political parties, it can be networks, as I tried to explain, of fugitive oligarchs that are based in Russia and can use I don't know, the banking sector that Russia provides for conducting very specific types of elements of this poverty weaponization. That will be the second takeaway. And now, as recommendation, I would like to focus on two aspects. One is a warning. I believe that we sometimes are being carried away with the fact that we are at war with Russia, which is a real war, but we also deal with different domestic issues, which are also very real for the population. So this criticism that is also authentic and legitimate has to be taken into account, because when we don't do that at home, it's Russia that is taking this advantage of us ignoring certain issues, and then they can much easily, amplify those issues and make them predominant on the public agenda. Exactly what Dmitry has been pointing to when mentioning about agenda setting in Georgia. And then the second would be an advice. And the advice is to pay careful attention to what is going to happen in the elections across Europe. We have very important elections in Spain and France next year. I believe that the political networks that are being, actively used by Russia or influenced by Russia, including through, we can see that through the discourses in the European Parliament, they are going to be reinforced after these elections. So most likely, the Russians are going to be more successful, or they will try to be more efficient than they were in Hungary, and really try to establish government that will be friendly to Russia, more open to resuming the dialogue with Russia, and less cooperative when it comes to support for Ukraine. And here I'll stop.
Thank you, Denis. Elena, please.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this highly intellectual and very interesting insights and this discussion. I would like to point out several things. First of all, when talking about subthreshold warfare, about its cognitive part especially, we tend to stuck on the level of being reactive instead of being proactive. Because while Russians want to shape who we are only talking about how to respond to their attacks in information space tied to specific events, like, for example, elections. Meanwhile, if you look at what Unitsky, the father of the term mental warfare, has been writing and saying or doing, they see this cognitive warfare as existential because, again, they think that either they will be able to destroy Western civilization or Western civilization will completely destroy Russian civilization, which, in my opinion, is one of the biggest anti-Russian information operations because, again, this regime tied its existence to the existence of the Russian people or the Russian culture or the Russian state. And we need to help them separate these notions. We need to help them re-identify what things like, for example, greatness is, what things as coexistence with the neighbors is, what is leadership, regional leadership. It doesn't have to be built only on military force. These all the other concepts which are very foreign to Russian mentality today. However, while Russians are very actively publish, for example, history books, and one of such books has been published back in 2023 and delivered by the Russian embassy in the United States to all the American think tanks, which was the history of Ukraine, written by Russians, and the foreword was from Lavrov. Why don't we write Russian history books? Why don't we disperse them everywhere? Why don't we help those people, even those Russians who are eager to start this work on rethinking Russian historical narratives? And this should be our aim, because without this very deep digging, we will never be able to ensure sustainable peace in Europe. And this was members of the Memorial Organization who once told me that it was a huge mistake on the part of the West to allow Russia do no historical memory work in the 1990s, thinking that building free market would automatically build democracy. It didn't happen because apart from all these, mechanisms that come with greed or desire to live a better life, the other part, the part when it comes to values, it remains essentially important. So we need to work with Russian mentality. We need to start feeling agency to influence them as well, because it seems like the Russian opposition in exile is incapable to do so. And I think that, and this will be my last point, I think that one of the major factor in this cognitive warfare is Western reaction to Russia's action on the ground, and that the lack of boldness in such decisions have caused what happened to Georgia, and Ukrainian people have this feeling towards Georgian people, and I think that it goes both ways, and it was also one of the reasons why the full-scale invasion has become possible, because of the lack of response back in 2014. So if this part of mental blocks that prevent Europeans and United States as well from not only implementing, but at this particular stage to develop a joint, unified, very clear strategy towards Russia in the short, mid, and long term, and this is not happening currently. We will not be able to sustain this joint effort in order to prevent these stories, like, for example, with Georgia, when there was so much hope, there was so much inspiration that we all will live in this prosperous Europe together, and then lack of clarity, lack of decisions from our Western allies led to where we all are right now.
Thank you, Elena. Yeah, indeed, the books on Russian history, in fact, will be our own books as well, of our own history, because it should be written. They've been writing our stories as well and our history. So, Georgi and Dmitry.
Yeah, and I will say shortly that what we observe, what we discuss, and what we see and what we read, it is huge battle of reality. And Russia is trying. Russia has a huge network to win this reality, and we need more support. I mean, support each other, support from Western countries as well, to create the reality which is our reality, which is reality, not manipulated reality. What Russia is doing, what Russia did in Soviet time, what they are doing now, and what they will do after they will lose the war, and they will lose the war. The main idea, this is the way how Russia understands. They creating their own reality. They're creating the reality which they want to insist and to spread everywhere with their network, and winning the information war, and winning the reality. Our duty, our no moral stance is that we have our European reality, which needs more sustain and supportive attitude towards each other, and to create this reality ourselves, to remember who we were in real life, in the past lives.
Thank you, Georgi. Dmitry.
So my last probably points that I think that it's important to disarm the propaganda and disarm the Russia. In this case, it's our internal political dynamics very important. So not only the democracy, which I was very much focused, but also the social welfare of the people, because the poor people are easiest part of Georgia or any society to manipulate. And it's historical truth. It's not something of the current or 21st century truth. It's historical truth that the poor people are easiest way to manipulate. The main target of the imposed propagandas and manipulations are them, and therefore welfare, democratic, real democracy, not the facade reform, but the real substantial reforms in order to make this institution really independent and to able to counter in case of regime transformation. In this regime transformation could happen not only the new democracies, but some traditional democracies. We are observing many, not many, but cases of such a transformation. And what Georgi just mentioned, I think that we have to focus more, much more on the coordination and cooperation between the democratic forces, because autocracies are not only coordinating and in a hidden way, but they have this very strong institutional system of working together, supporting together, supporting each other and financing each other. And one of the main defeat of this regime was Hungary. Definitely, Orban was one of the main kind of foundational hero of that process, which was distributing the resources, not only the ideological, but the financial, technical resources to the different countries in Western, Eastern Europe, in our region as well. So I think we have to focus more, quite lots on our cooperation among us. And one probably the critical question, so especially very important for Georgia now, do North prevail or the geopolitics prevail? What is more important? And are the North part of the strategic political decisions in Europe? Should Europe separate the accession and free Georgia from the obligations or requirements in case joining or inviting Georgia to connectivity projects, or North should be prevail? That's a important fundamental questions where the Europeans have to answer. I think that's a big challenge, and I think that this ambiguity in these European policies toward the connectivity versus accession or enlargement is used by Georgian Dream as a strategic tools to play double game. Okay, will keep on paper our accession plan, which doesn't make sense for them anymore. So if we are connected with the connectivity project, middle corridor, and so on, so the plan is done. So the Georgian dream is winning. So therefore, this strategic decision should be made by European Union. That is very important. And maybe very last point, because we have not mentioned, but I think it's something worth to mention. I know from Georgian perspective that in propaganda, AI is very much used. AI is making every effort much easier, much more effective, the scale of the propaganda even larger. I don't know how much we're using the AI against the propaganda. Not only debunking, because it's also important, but in fighting against the propaganda, AI is very important. I think we have to all think about it. It's an open question for me. I don't have the answers. I don't know how much it's used, but I think it's worth to consider as one of the future plan to incorporate AI in our fight against the propaganda and generally against autocratic regimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, indeed. Something that came out of this discussion today was pretty obvious that we need to rethink on the strategic approach, and we need to better explain to our Western partners what are the real threats, and maybe this is something that we can somehow join our sources, and definitely we have a lot of things to do. Still ongoing. Thank you very much for today, everyone. It was really inspiring and very useful to exchange all the sources, all the information and all the knowledge. It definitely helps us to understand where we stand and what we can do, actually. Thank you very much for this discussion, and definitely have a lot of other things to discuss in future. I've been inspired. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Anna. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.